everyone, welcome to another edition of Curious Rebel TV. My name is Advita Patel and I'm the founder of Comms Rebel, the co-founder of A Leader Like Me and the co-founder of Carmage Rebels. At Comms Rebel, we help organisations build cultures of inclusion so their people can thrive, and we do that through effective communication. And today I am delighted to be here with the wonderful Mo Kanjilal. And some of you who will know Mo will know that she has an absolute interest in inclusion, has a book coming out very soon, which we're going to talk about as well. And today's topic is all going to be around inclusion and engagement and people and all the good stuff. And we are here on a Thursday, by the way, not a Friday, so you're not mistaken. We're coming live on Thursday because it's Good Friday in the UK. I think it's a Good Friday everywhere. I don't know. That's something I need to look. I think it is. I don't know. Anyway, definitely in the UK. So we're coming here Thursday live. So welcome, Mo. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited about this. I've been looking forward to it all week.
I know. I've been really looking forward to it. So do you want to tell the folks who you are, what you do, where you're from, all those kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I'm Mo Kanjilal and I'm one of the co-creators of Watch This Space. There's two of us that founded the company, and we're a diversity and inclusion company founded during the pandemic. So in next month, which is just coming up, we're 4 years old. It was in lockdown that we founded the business, and we help organisations to really learn how people can work better together with different types of people, that they can collaborate better, and so that you get different types of people in teams. And yeah, as you said, we've written a book which is going to be published later this year.
Exciting. So tell us more about this book that's coming out, because I know you're publishing the same as ours, Kogan Page. So how did it, tell us a story actually, how did it come about?
I'll tell you the story. So I'm based in Brighton. I didn't say that either. I'm based in Brighton, down in the south. So we founded the business and it was going well, and we're sort of growing, getting lots of clients. And then we've done quite a lot of kind of media appearances, that kind of thing. And I think that's how Kogan Page found us. So we were approached by Kogan Page, got an email on a Friday to say, are you interested in writing a book? And I was like, so Allegra, my business partner, doesn't actually work on Fridays. And I messaged her and I was like, this can't wait. Because actually both of us, we've both always wanted to write a book, and we write blogs and things, and we're both working on a novel. But this was like an amazing thing that they approached us. So then conversations progressed with Kogan Page. They've been brilliant to work with. We could have gone for publication next year, but they said to us, do you want to publish it sort of in 2024? And we were like, let's go for it and just get the book written really quickly, which we did. And so it's going to be published in August, and yeah, we're really excited about it.
What's the book called?
It's called The Inclusion Journey, and it's about how to take a company through an inclusion journey and engage employees along the way. So how you deliver on it successfully and really engage the organisation. We've got lots of case studies. We interviewed lots of people, and packed full of sort of resources. And we're going to have things that you can download as well, so that people can really work on it. Yeah.
And it's available pre-order, right now?
Yes, it's available now for pre-order. Yeah, it was briefly on the day that it went onto Amazon. They labelled it as a hot new release, and we were like, oh God.
I know. You know what? Those things are so exciting. We found out about our book that was on Amazon from Priya's husband, Glenn. So Priya's husband got an email from Amazon saying something that you might be interested in our book for sale. And we hadn't even seen the book cover or knew that it was going to go live. So that was such a surprise for both of us as well. So when Glenn messaged Priya and said, is this your book? We're like, oh my God, it is. It's our book. It was just, that feeling.
It's so exciting. Those moments when you see it on those websites, on Waterstones and things.
I know, Barnes and Noble and places like that.
So exciting.
It is really exciting. And especially we got, so Seth Godin has been like number 1 and 2 in PR and comms for a long time. And then our book actually went to number 1 above his. And we were like, I took about 15 screen grabs, I'm not going to lie. We're above Seth Godin's book. I mean, it was like for a few days, but that's it. But still, I was like, it was like being on the Times bestseller for us.
Yeah.
But that feeling it doesn't really go away. And seeing your book, you're in a brilliant place right now where you've written the book, they're going doing the type and all that stuff. So you're ready to go, kind of. It's like exciting. But like I said, we'll put the link to Mo's book in the comments. So please do pre-order it. I know it's going to be a fantastic read, especially because it's just around this inclusive journey.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't really consider in the workplace, right? So the reason that Priya and I wrote our book around building culture of inclusivity through effective comms is because what we saw in the organizations that we supported was that these brilliant initiatives came into organizations, but often it fell apart when it came to comms and how to communicate it down the chain. And a lot of the internal comms folks were stuck in how to support EDI and HR teams on how to do this properly, which is where the book came from our perspective. So when you decided to start this business 4 years ago with your business partner, what was your main driver for it? Like, you know, COVID was kind of right in the middle of it, right? You started it. What kind of pushed you to start Watch This Space?
Yeah,
Or was
that's a really good. Yeah, it's a really good question. So so my background is I'd worked in technology corporations
yeah,
where I progressed to senior leadership, but I was very different to everyone there, and I'd had my own bad experiences, and I'd seen other people have experiences that showed me that there was so much to do on inclusion. So I worked on inclusion initiatives myself in those organizations, and Allegra had had similar experiences herself working in sectors that she'd worked in kind of healthcare and digital marketing. She'd had that too. When I left corporate and started working more locally, I thought to myself, I could do nothing with this extra time, or I could try and do something. So I started volunteering for a charity called the Girls Network, where you mentor teenage girls. And I was asked to join a panel discussion one evening, and the other panelist was Allegra, and that's how I met her. So that's how, and then she said to me, well, I'm running this networking group in Brighton called Brighton Digital Women. Do you want to join us and kind of help us with it? So I was doing that quite happily until we got to the pandemic. And then in lockdown, we saw all of these employers struggling with what to do. Also saw employers that had said, no, you can never do that job working remotely, suddenly making it work overnight. We saw that there was no childcare thought about in all of the decisions that were being made. We saw, we could just see that there was a glaring need to do something about it. And we were on a Zoom call in April 2020, and we said, well, we've got all this time, we can't leave the house. Should we just do something about it? So that's when Watch This Space was founded. The name, annoyingly, was thought of by Allegra's husband, and it's to signify the gaps and the spaces and the gender pay gaps and the fact that the world's changing, so you need to watch those spaces, you need to do something about it. So the bit that Allegra came up with was the underscore of the A, so we're very particular about that because it's the thing that makes it
be there. Yeah, I love it. It's such, that's such a great story how you met Allegra. So Priya and I, same with similar kind of story to Priya and how Priya and I met for a leader like me, where I actually followed Priya for a while on LinkedIn as one of the very few South Asian women working in internal comms.
Yeah.
I really admired her from afar. And then when I was starting my business, Comms Rebel, I messaged her on LinkedIn and asked if she would consider being my mentor. And she messaged back saying, actually, why don't we mentor each other? Because there's lots I can learn from you as well. And then we started the conversation in January 2020 when I launched Comms Rebel. And then we just started to chat about our similar experiences in the workplace. Like, why did we leave corporate? What was the reason for that? What was my mission and vision for Comms Rebel? And then the pandemic happened about 8 weeks later, and we started to talk about a leader like me. So Priya was saying it would have been, one of the things, well, I said to Priya, one of the things that I would have really benefited from is having people like Priya's that I could look up to, because there was no leaders like me that made me feel that I could belong. And then Priya's like, yeah, there's something missing in the world we can see leaders like, if we can see leaders like ourselves, then we can succeed better, she believed. And that's where a leader like me came from. And it's Priya came up with the name A Leader Like Me. And we started a membership in March 2020. And then obviously we know what happened in May 2020 with all the murders that took place in the US with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And then the business kind of just changed for me, for Comms Rebel, for Priya, for Inner Strength, and then for a leader like me itself. So it's just these opportunities. So it's those Hollywood moments. They say cute meets, don't they? Like, meet people like unintentionally, and you never know where that might take us. So I feel like we've got very similar unexpected journeys on how businesses, and you just click. Like, Priya's based in Canada, like she's 5,000 miles away from me, and we managed to have started a business globally 5,000 miles apart, and we just clicked. We just knew we get along well.
Which is what happened with us, and we really enjoyed writing the book together as well. I don't know if you found that. Like, we loved it.
Yeah. There was no, and we're really worried because Kogan Page, they don't want like jolting views, like jolting tones, right? They want it to be quite seamless. And we were a little bit like, we haven't really written long form together. So I wonder how we'll get on. And we took a chapter each. That's the way we did it. We did.
That's how we did it as well. Yeah.
So when Priya did chapter 1, I did chapter 2. We were a bit like nervous. Like, are we on the same page? Do we write the same style? And it was just seamless. Like
that's what happened with us. Yeah. Allegra would read chapters of Mark that I'd written and say, well, it's just like how I would write it.
Yeah, that's what we do. It's so weird, isn't it? How you just kind of click with the right people at the right time. And even our commissioning editor at Kogan Page was like, I couldn't really tell the difference between who wrote what and how, and because you're just so aligned with your thinking and stuff, which is such a great way of, it's that validation, right? That actually we work well together and we're doing good stuff. So that's brilliant. Right. So talking about working well together and doing things well, so you obviously work with lots of organizations to help them work with people better, right? And how you can build this more inclusive way of working through the employee experience journey. In your experience over the last 4 years and beyond that, what is the biggest barrier or blocker for organizations to really embrace this way of working? Because there's so much research out there, right? You know this, you've done the book, you've done the case studies. There's so much research out there that demonstrates the benefit of having a more inclusive way of working and practices and inclusive leadership and all of that stuff. But there's still some resistance, right, from certain organizations and certain leaders and individuals. What do you think it is? Like, what, in your experience, what have you witnessed that's made you think this is one of the biggest blockers and barriers that people are facing right now?
So there's a few things that come to mind. One is that I think there's a lot of fear. So people are afraid to voice that. So they're scared that something's going to be taken away from them. I think that's one of the fears. I think the other fear is that it's going to totally distract them from the work they're doing, or that it's going to cost loads of money. You know, there's these sort of fears that are voiced. And so we think a lot of it is about engaging leaders early on. The leaders of the organization have to really want to do this. And the way to engage the leaders is to show them that this is part of the core work. This isn't something extra or something different. You know, in creating inclusive teams will get you all those benefits that we all know about, that's well researched. So it's really about showing people what to do. And the way we work is we show people really simple, easy steps to get started, because that's the other thing. People think, oh, I haven't got time. We're like, well, just do this to start with. Here's some really simple things you can do. And then that starts to make change happen. And then when people see change happen, that's when they then get really engaged. And we talk about the communication as well, and the fact that you then get employees that they'll almost start driving it and getting engaged in the actions too. So yeah, definitely a few different things. And we think communication is really key to it as well, like how it's communicated, the enthusiasm that's shown around it, the fact that communicating to those people that might be scared, like how to show them that this isn't something to be fearful on. We're not going to be taking things away from you, because somehow that's what people feel that's going to happen. So when we do training, we talk about that as well. We talk about the concept of universal design, that if you make a building more accessible, it's a better building for everyone. If you make a website accessible, it's better for everyone. So it's talking in those terms to get people engaged and enthused. And we try, I don't know, I'm sure you do similar as communications experts, we try not to use acronyms too much and like things that people don't understand as well. Try and talk in simple language to people. Yeah.
One of the things I always, because one of the bits of feedback I often get from leaders, specifically when I'm talking about comms, is how can I, because we talk about equity a lot, right? So you need to be equitable and make sure that individuals get what they need to thrive. And some of the pushback we get sometimes is saying, well, there's just so much to do and I don't know where to start and how to even implement some of this stuff. And my big piece of advice is think of or look at the most marginalized individual in your team and address it for them, because if you address whatever challenges they're facing, the majority will benefit. And that is one of where you can address some of the inequities that are in your team. Because if you look at the most marginalized person, and if you can address some of their challenges, then it's obviously the majority are going to benefit from whatever you implement at that place in time. And a lot of folks don't think of it in that way. That's where the fear bit comes in, right? Because they're saying there's just so much to do, and I'm not as educated in this space as I should be. So I don't know where to start. So rather than just starting and making a mistake, I'm just not going to do anything. And it'll be okay if I don't do anything, because if I don't do anything, then I can't get it wrong, and if I don't get it wrong, then I can't be blamed. And that's this kind of cycle they go through. And it's really interesting that you talked about acronyms and making sure that we use English that is easier or simple to understand. And I'm not a big fan of people saying things like dumbing it down. It's never about dumbing it down. It's always about keeping it simple. And inclusive language is something that obviously as comms professionals, we get involved in quite frequently around how can we make this work, this content more inclusive. Is that, for those of folks who are listening and watching either on replay or live, why is inclusive language, in your opinion, and the work that you're doing so important? Like, what does it even mean for organizations when we talk about inclusive language?
Yeah, so inclusive language is including people in how you talk and speak. So it's using language that doesn't discriminate, using language that doesn't confuse people, if doesn't marginalize people. So it's kind of, it really, in simple terms, using language that includes people. And then if you go into further details, it's thinking about the pronouns you use, it's thinking about the terminology you use. But I think actually a key to inclusive language is about very simple, clear language as well. And the amount of times you might have seen this too, when you work with an organization and you look at some of their internal communications, and they will often say, oh, yeah, well, we found that employees didn't really engage with that. You look at the communications, you're like, that's why. It's got overly complicated language. It doesn't speak to them in a language that they understand. And so to me, inclusive language is all about that. How can you reach people and really engage them with your communications?
Yeah. One of the things I always say to when we talk about inclusive language is that you need to define as well what these. So I'm a big advocate of inclusive language guides.
Yeah,
like what
terminologies
should we be using in this organization, and what terminology shouldn't we be using? And it's an evolving thing, right? So I always say it's a working document. Like, it's not language, as you know, Mo, changes every day. Like, what was acceptable yesterday is not acceptable today in the grand scheme of things. And people always go, oh God, it's just so much to think about. And I'm like, well, the word Google didn't exist 15 years ago. Nor did, the kind of words like Snapchat or TikTok. And yet we seem to have adapted quite well in putting them in our everyday language. So what's the harm in adapting ourselves to make sure that the language that we have is a little bit more inclusive to others? But you do need a starting point, because it can be a little bit overwhelming for lots of folks. So inclusive language guides is something that I will always advise folks to think about. And we wrote a chapter about it actually in one of the last chapters in our book is about how do you write an inclusive language guide and why, like, what is the purpose of it?
I'm smiling because we quoted your book in ours.
I love it. I love it when people quote it. But I still get really surprised when people go, oh, quoted you in my book, or quoted you in my paper. I'm like, oh, did you? I love that. Thank you so much for doing that. But it is important. The more people that recognize the rationale and the benefits of doing things like inclusive language guides. If you don't have one in your organization right now, I would highly recommend you look into it, especially even if you don't get as far as doing an inclusive language guide. Definitely define what you mean as an organization when you're talking about diversity, equity, or equality, or both, and inclusion, right? And identify what that means. Because yesterday I ran a workshop and we had a conversation around equity and equality, and somebody said, oh, I didn't realize the E in DEI stood for equity. I thought it stood for equality. And I said, it depends. I said, it depends on the organization. I said, some people use equality and some people use equity, and some people interchange the two because they don't know the difference between the two. I said, so it's really important that you understand what your organization is following and why, and understand the difference between equality. So those who don't know, that equality is when you give everyone access to the same thing. So everybody gets training. It doesn't matter how, everyone just gets it. That's the training. And equity, I would say, is how they receive it. So some people may need it online. Some people may want it in person. Some people may need additional support to access that training. And that's the equity side. So you're looking at individuals in terms of the support they need. So you may give everyone in your organization training because that's equal and that's fair. But then how do they access that could be very different depending on their characteristic and their needs and privileges that they have. And that's the differentiation. That's a very simple definition, but that's generally what that means.
Yeah, that's a good example. And we do a similar thing in our in our inclusion journey mapping that we do with companies, we have a stage at the beginning that's discovery. And as part of the discovery process, we have in the workshops, we say, okay, let's talk about language. What's the terminology that you find
Yeah.
confusing? And like get that out in the open. And usually at that point, there's a sigh of relief because they say, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I really don't understand this. And they can say like what language they're struggling to understand or what acronyms they don't understand.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I was talking to a friend this morning, and I said, my bias is that I am surrounded by some incredible individuals who are advanced in this work, right? So in inclusion, diversity, and equity, very advanced, and they're researchers or authors, and the work in the space. So my bias is that most people understand some of the terminologies, like things like psychological safety, cultural intelligence, those things, those words that come into my world frequently. And again, when I go into organizations and when I'm running workshops and I say things like, oh, you need to create a psychological safe environment, that you are met with a sea of blank faces because people are like, well, what do you mean by psychological safe environment? I'm like, do people not know this? My bias is quite strong on that. So I need to work on understanding that not everybody is going to be in that space of understanding that. Amy Edmondson wrote a book about fearless organization, which is about psychological safety. Just because I read it and the people around me have read it or are aware of those terms, I would say 80% of the folks don't know it. And that's when we talk about breaking down language and terminologies, that applies to us, right? As professionals and practitioners in this space as well, and not making that assumption that everybody knows what we're talking about. So you doing that discovery work at the start is, great, because it allows you to understand where they are on their journey of inclusion and what needs and what they need, right, in order to address the kind of employee experience journey in the organization, because everyone is so different. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that people go and watch speakers or go and see case studies and go to events, which is great, but don't recognize that that culture, even though they may be in the same industry, is very different from the culture that they may be in. And on that note, what advice would you give to individuals who are struggling right now to embed or implement more inclusive practices? So they're facing, we kind of touched on a little bit, say they're facing resistance from leadership who understand the basics of inclusion and diversity and have got the employee resourcing groups in place and all that kind of stuff, but are not willing to invest time or budget in this, and they're kind of hitting a brick wall. What advice or steps could you share with this person who may be struggling to kind of influence or create impact in their organization when it comes to this work?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So my background in corporate was in sales, and sales is all about working out the individuals or groups, what's driving them, what their priorities are, how you can help them. And so that's the approach we suggest for people, is that you need to map out who the stakeholders are and then engage with them, because it's not going to be the same approach for everyone. So you need to think at, right, the leadership team, how do I engage with them, or particular individuals in the leadership team, like what's important to them? And that's how to approach it. So for example, we work with some tech companies, and we know the business case for tech is like really strong, that there's 19% more innovation from diverse teams. But if you just say that, that's not really going to like convince an engineering manager, perhaps, who's got other priorities. So it's about looking at what are they working on and how can you show them that actually working on this is going to help them with those goals. So the goals are aligned to the inclusion work. They're not something separate, because I think that's where often these things will stall, is that people see it as some separate work done over there by some people in their spare time, when it's actually core to the strategy. And so it's figuring those things out, and it's taking that kind of approach of understanding what different people need, and then that then has effect. So that's the kind of thing we work on when we work with companies, often coaching people on how they need to do that. So my sales background, interestingly, comes into it quite a lot.
Yeah, love that. We've got a question from Christopher, which I'm just going to put on the screen. So, question to Mo. I love the chat. Thanks, Christopher. How do you identify companies that need DEI help? Or do they self-identify and approach yourself? Or do you just scan the Meet the Team page and go, not much diversity there?
That's interesting. So so people will often say to us, "Oh, what's the sectors that you specialise in?" And we're like, actually, it's quite broad, the sectors that we work in. We work in quite a lot of sectors. I think the characteristic is the organisation wants to change. they'll have some challenges that they're perhaps working on, like they need to increase the size of the company, or they need to increase employee retention, or there's some sort of characteristic like that that actually drives people to want to work on this. And then in terms of how we engage, so our outreach is, again, taking that sales approach, like what's important to particular roles and particular sectors. So that's how we'll approach it, depending on who we're talking to or the sector we're talking to. We talk about the benefits and like how it's going to help them. And then actually, a lot of the time, so we do get people like HR leaders, chief people officers, those kinds of people will often be the ones that approach us. But quite a lot, it's actually employees. I don't know if you find that employees who are doing some research because they want something to happen in their organization. So they might have had an experience themselves, or they want to work for a more inclusive organization. And so it's actually them that often drive talking to us in the first place. It's really interesting how that happens. Yeah.
Often it is a mix, what you just described. It's often, so in my experience, especially because it's kind of comms world, is that there's sometimes been a bit of a crisis.
Yeah, that happens with us too.
Kind of manage the reputation side of things. So that kind of is a bit of a pull. So we want to try and avoid that level, because you're at crisis mode at that point. And so you're kind of firefighting quite a lot. So that pull is there. And then sometimes we have employees, like you just said, who DM and say that I read your post on LinkedIn about XYZ, and this is what I'm experiencing right now. Is there any advice you give me, or can I introduce you to my HR director or comms lead about this as well? Because I feel like we've got a bit of a gap. And then my kind of, for a leader like me specifically, is definitely more heads of comms and heads of HR who are struggling with comms. Sometimes, like they're not, our comms team don't understand, or we don't have a comms team. So we don't really know how to communicate this as well as we should be communicating it. We don't have a strategy in place. So that's where we often get involved once the EDI strategy is in place, but then they're stuck. Like, how do we now communicate this incredible strategy we put together without overwhelming our colleagues or employees or stakeholders with lots of stuff? Like, how do we balance it out and put it as part of our everyday language and everyday world? So that's where we kind of come in and support. Sometimes we get involved in various other bits and pieces, but it just depends on needs. And as you know, Christopher's right, that sometimes we do look at the leadership sometimes and think, oh, there isn't much diversity here, and what do they need to do that? But that's not an overnight fix, as you know.
No.
That takes time, and that takes a little bit of education and energy, and depending on the industry and all that. But great question, Christopher. Great.
Yeah, really great. And I was going to say, the other thing is sometimes it is people come to us because they've got a problem as well. Like, they're struggling to recruit, they're struggling to retain, they've had something happen. Like, we hope that doesn't happen, but that does. Obviously, that is a source of when people contact us as well.
Yeah. And people have now got platforms, right, to share these stories. So a lot of organizations are fully aware that you've got Glassdoor now, that people can write comments about how their experience was, LinkedIn, social media, even like TikTok, people are doing like little videos of day in their life, and whether they get permission or not, people are like, oh, they need to get permission for that. It's like, it doesn't matter. They're not going to get, it's already out there, it's already gone viral, there's already 3 million people watching some of the toxic environments that you've got going on. So let's not worry about that right now, because you can not, like when I first started out in comms and Facebook came out, there's this whole rules around how you should be using Facebook.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way now, especially with the Gen Z generation. They're growing up with it, the native. Telling them they can't use it is not going to stop them using it.
Exactly.
So you have to be quite mindful of that kind of stuff. Right. So last week, or the week before, sorry, Vicky left a question for you, and it's about how do you look after your well-being? What is your top tip, and how do you look after your well-being?
Yeah, I love that question. So for me, it's finding what works for you. So for me, what I love and really does a lot for my well-being and mental health is having time to read and read around different subjects and really absorb myself in it. So for me, like, a great day is where I've got nothing to do, no one's going to contact me, and I can just sit at home and read quietly about something I'm interested in, and I feel like immediately restored. And I might incorporate into that going for a walk or something, but that sort of space, that time and space. So I think it's finding what is the thing that gives you that space to think differently, and have that space to think about your every day, really. Yeah.
Well, as research came out to say that if you spend 5 minutes every morning reading fiction, it helps 20%, you raise your dopamine thing by 20%. So
Wow, there you go.
your stress is reduced, you're happier, you have a better day, even if it's just 5 minutes every morning if you did that. So I heard that this morning on the news, which I think is brilliant.
There you
Reading
go.
is a nice and such a welcoming kind of well-being activity, right? Because you're in your own
That's my
world.
plan for tomorrow, is to do some
Love it.
reading, some fiction.
Love
Yeah.
that. And what's your question for our next guest, who's going to be Mark from Leeds Uni?
Yes. So my question is, what's your advice for handling a situation where you meet somebody who has a very different opinion to you on something you feel passionately about? Like, how do you approach that conversation?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love it. I love it. Mark, we've got a couple of weeks to think about that, because we're going to be a solo episode next week with me, but then Mark's the week after. I can't believe it's 30 minutes, Mo.
I know. The time has flown by. I know. I knew that would happen.
So quickly. But thank you so much for your time. If people want to get a hold of you or message you, where is the best place they can do that for you?
So our website is watchthispace.uk, and our email address is hello@watchthispace.uk, and you'll also find us on social media at watchthispce, and there's a link to buy the book on our website as well.
Amazing. And we're going to share the link for Mo's book, and Allegra's book, on the comments as well, the website and all that. So please do connect with Mo on LinkedIn directly, as well as the organisation, and look out for the book coming out in August. I wish you all the best. I know it's going to be a brilliant seller. Thank you so much,
Thanks for having me
Mo.
on.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye.